And so here we go. Aaron, I assume you're there.
Yes, I'm here.
That's great. Okay.
Hello.
I'm going to introduce you and we'll get going here. Um, in case you don't know, Aaron Sims is the director of the CNPS Rare Plant Program, has been for many years. Um, and he has over 17 years of experience as a professional botanist, including work at Cal Poly SLO, environmental consulting, and as an ecologist for the state parks. And I was mainly doing rare plant work. Tonight, he will introduce us to CNPS Rare Plant Inventory, celebrating 50 years of innovation and advancement of rare plant stewardship and conservation in California. So welcome, Aaron. So you're going to share your screen?
Yes, thank you so much, Snowdy. Thank you, Snowdy, and the LA Santa Monica Mountains chapter for inviting me to present tonight. I'm honored, and it's great to see you all. I recognize some of your names. It's great to have you here, and thank you for inviting me into your offices and living rooms and wherever you are. So I'm Aaron Sims. I've worked for CNPS since 2010. Um, and I'm going to give a short land acknowledgement. I'm actually based out of Weaverville, California, which is in Trinity County, and it's originally home and to the northern Wintu, the Yurok, Hoopa, and Klamath tribes. And I just wanted to say that the biodiversity of California as a whole wouldn't be as robust and well off as it is today without the proper land management from the indigenous tribes throughout the state. So I give my many thanks and recognition to that. Let me get my screen sharing here. Let's see, I think this is the right. Okay. So a little bit overview of my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the rare plant inventory, how it came about, and then I'm going to give a live demonstration of the inventory. It's all fully online, and so for those of you that haven't used it, it'll be completely new, but hopefully you'll learn something if you have used it in the past. And then I'm going to go over some of the causes and types of rarity. It's a question I frequently get asked. Why are plants, what is a rare plant? What does it mean? Some of the definitions and terms, what makes plants rare? And so I'll go over some of the causes and types of rarity. And then I'll end my presentation about the number of rare plants in California and the significance that the CNPS inventory has for protecting rare plants in California. You can all see my screen.
Not yet.
Oh, here we go. How about
Okay.
now? Okay. Let me make sure I've got the slides up. So this is the 50th anniversary. It was established, the first inventory came out in 1974. And this year, my goal is to just bring awareness to the inventory and this great resource that CNPS founded and has stewarded throughout the last 50 years and share some of the successes that we've had because of it. Throughout my presentation, I have these little QR codes. If you're not familiar with using these, you don't have to follow the link right away. I recommend actually just taking a quick picture of the screen, and then you should be able to go back to that picture and actually look up the QR code within your phone if you're interested. And so you don't have to worry about trying to struggle to get that link right away if you're interested in following it. So what is the inventory? Well, it's a free online tool that enables both simple and advanced searches and display outputs of all of California rare plants, which is currently over 2,450. And it's widely accepted as the standard for information on rarity and endangerment of the California flora. It's used daily by professionalists as well as educationists and novices as well. It's really to fight off extinction and engage community scientists and inform on land use decisions statewide. And before I go into a little bit of the history, another question I get asked often is, why should I care about rare plants? Some rare plants are so very, very tiny and very small and only in small areas. And so it's often questioned what their significance is on the landscape compared to more charismatic and say species that are megafauna or megaflora rather, and more keystone species to others. And so here's some of the reasons, the quick laundry list here. Saving plants can actually lead to saving places. So our goal is to protect biodiversity as a whole. They also contribute to biodiversity, no matter how small that is. And often we don't know how much they contribute to biodiversity because we're still learning a lot. They play key ecological roles, have evolutionary significance. They may provide medicinal uses. We just don't know yet for a lot of California plants. They have protections under legal regulations. They're targets for conservation planning. Again, they can help protect other organisms as well. And really, there should be of one's environmental ethics and morals to want to prevent species from going extinct. And not lastly, but they are very beautiful. I find them very beautiful anyway. This is Darlingtonia californica, one of California's insectivorous plants that occurs up where I'm at. And then another way to describe this, one of the fathers of conservation biology, the late Michael Soleil, described 4 conservation principles, and they are that the conserving the diversity of organisms is important. They carry ecological complexity. They function in evolutionary processes, and also biodiversity has intrinsic value irrespective of its value, irrespective of its usefulness to people. And this is the one that really hits me to my soul and my being, that, you know, I often am trying to move away from the term natural resources, because to me, it kind of has this stigma of, you know, how are we going to use this? How are we going to use this resource to our benefit? And really, we ought to be looking at it as that everything is, you know, deserves life on this earth, and we're all unique beings, and we share this, you know, planet together. And as you all know, we all come from stardust, so we all share this planet and life together, and we should just care on that intrinsic value, even if we don't know those uses. Another way to look at it, to try to contextualize it, is thinking of a tower of Jenga blocks. You know, if we lose some of those blocks, the tower will still be standing. So if we lose some species, the ecosystem isn't going to collapse, but it does get weakened. And over time, you know, it can get increasingly weakened. And if we intentionally let one species go, no matter how small, what about others that are next? And how do you draw that line? We must protect at some level to prevent extinction and to slow its rate. And now on to the inventory itself. So back in 1968, so CNPS was founded in 1965. So only a few years later, Ledyard Stebbins, who was the president and one of the founders of the Native Plant Society, began compiling a list of plants that he deemed as being rare or significant in California. And he did this using Munz's California flora, looking at plants that had only had a distribution of 100 miles or less, by looking at the descriptions of the range of the plants in that book. And his first list developed was 526 plants. And he put these on index cards that were 5x8 sized index cards. And the goal was to get these all down and send them around to academics and botanists and people that are interested to find out more information. A few years after that, Bob Powell, who is also a professor at UC Davis, used a Burroughs 6700 computer to computerize these 5x8 cards. So Ledyard typed them up in a typewriter, and then Bob Powell ran them through this computer to digitize them and to computerize them so that they could be updated, they could be copied easier and sent out. This was the first series of computers using disks rather than drum storage. And I looked this up. To me, this was pretty amazing to find this out through, this year of looking back in the history. This computer essentially came out that year in 1970 or 71. So, and it was really, in higher competition than IBM. And it was one of like the supercomputers of the time, essentially. So it's really like using the most cutting edge technology of the time to really get the inventory started. So that was pretty exciting to learn. And then Ledyard knew that he couldn't do all this alone, so he was really good at enlisting help and enlisting volunteers. And Roman Genkin was another such person that he enlisted that really helped to get the inventory started and distributed. So once the card index was created, it was printed out into a list that could then be shared. So it was a good start, but the list was lacking scientific rigor and verifiable data. So the need was to send it out and get more information, requiring a lot of herbarium review, where herbaria are where plants are pressed and stored, the museums for plants, if you will, at universities and academia. And they needed to map and verify the locations to make sure that these plants were really rare, to make the list really defensible. And back in that time, a couple of years after that, after the list was being distributed, the state CNPS conservationist, the conservation chair, Les Hood, was really good at finding funding and was able to secure a $25,000 grant proposal from the state of California. And I can imagine back then that was a whole lot more money than it is now. And they used that money to go to herbaria, send people to herbaria, and examine and key out thousands of specimens to make sure that they were identified properly, to really determine this rarity. And they took photographs, 35 millimeter photographs of all of these herbarium vouchers for these rare plants that were in the initial inventory list, to use that as the criteria and the evidence-based information on the locations. And then they took these, and the state also they procured over 1,800 maps from the state, topo maps, and they took these photographs of the locations in these maps, and they went out and relocated a lot of these rare plants and verified them on the ground. They hired a lot of grad students throughout California, mostly based in the Bay Area, to go through different herbaria. And this was before, now we have the Consortium of California Herbaria, which some people might take for granted, that has millions of records of vouchered plants, and thousands upon thousands of them are imaged and digitized, so we can just have that at our fingertips. But back then, that didn't exist, and so they had to do this manual, physical labor process to get this information. And so these are the boxes of the photocopies and photographs of herbarium location labels for plants, and we still have these in our office at CNPS headquarters in Sacramento. Back in 1973, after they did a lot of that field work, 40 botanists stayed up late into the night. They all met at the UC Davis campus. And I read an article that Bob Powell wrote around this time, and he described how it was being covered on television, and that it was likely the first of its kind. So this was, considered a lot of state botanists and so forth, but they also had people from out of state coming to review the list and really hash it out and develop the final list, if you will, through this expert knowledge all coming together. And so a year after that, the first publication came out, and it was roughly 1,400 plants. Since that time, there was 6 print editions. This QR code will take you to these digitized print editions. Some of this historical content is still valuable. And from 2001 to present, it's been converted to a fully online system. And I'm going to go over that in more detail here in a minute. So the new online inventory, this one 9.5 was just released in 2021, and it's been updated a few times since. And the prior releases of the print editions were every 4 to 7 years. For about 10 years, from 2001 to 2010, the online version was being updated quarterly, so every 3 months. And then from 2010 to 21, it was once a month. And then just with this last edition, we're now able to make changes on the back end that are seen instantly online once you press the save button. So it's pretty exciting. This is really important because it gets the most current conservation information to people for using in comment letters for environmental impact statements reports, or to include in their project reports. We're constantly reevaluating and changing the status of rare plants and the information. So, it's great to not have to wait anymore about that. So it's pretty exciting. And since that time of 50 years ago, we've added over 1,000 additional plants. The rare plant inventory consists of 5 ranks. We call them California rare plant ranks. These used to be called CNPS lists. They're the same definitions. They go from being extinct or presumed extinct to endangered and threatened in California to uncommon. So real briefly, these you might see or referenced here. These were developed by CNPS and modified over the years slightly since Stebbins created that original card index. But the largest list we have are the 1B category. So if you hear of a plant, oh, that's a 1B, if you're on a plant hike or whatever, this is what the trip leader is talking about. Steve Hartman, I'm sure you might run into some rare plants when he gives his hikes, and so keep an eye out for 1Bs or other watch list species. This is our highest number of ranked plants. We have over 1,200 plants in this category, and a lot of these are endemic to California, so meaning they only occur in the state of California, but that doesn't have to be the case. So they do occur elsewhere. Typically, they're also rare in Oregon or also rare in Nevada or bordering states. We do have this category of plants that are rare in California, but they're common elsewhere. And so that's kind of an interesting thing where we can actually protect plants and the heritage of California, even if they're globally common. But if they're limited here or under significant threat, we can rank them and include them. Then we have these problematic plants that are mostly taxonomically problematic that we're trying to figure out. The majority of these 71 plants, if they are taxonomically valid, they would be jumped to this 1B category, being really rare. And then we have 608 plants that are uncommon in California and considered a watch list. And you can learn more by following this link or the QR code. So gone are the days of photographing labels. As I mentioned previously, the Consortium of California Herbaria is a wonderful resource for the work we do today to catalog and categorize plants and rarity. Currently, the California Academy of Sciences just a year or two ago received nearly $2.5 million to digitize 1 million plant specimens. They're one of the largest herbaria for California, and yet they had millions records for California plants that were not digitized. And so they're actually using the state-of-the-art conveyor belt system where they can digitize 4,000 plant vouchers a day. And a couple of my staff were in Berkeley, or in San Francisco rather, and they got to see this conveyor belt in action and just a constant, staff and volunteers helping to move the plants along. That was pretty exciting. So in California, the California Native Plant Society and the work that we do in the Rare Plant Program really initiate and rank plants in California, but we also do this with collaboration with the state of California. So the California Natural Diversity Database is one of the branches of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we have offices in Sacramento that were shared at the state building there. And we really work together to finalize the ranks. The Natural Diversity Database independently assigns and reassigns global and state ranks. So if you ever hear of G ranks or S ranks, that's designated by the state as part of the Natural Heritage Program. And CNPS is involved with helping to develop those ranks, but it's really they kind of have the final evaluation of those. And then CNPS initiates and develops the status review documents and the process for California rare plant ranking. So we have this really close relationship and this acceptance and great work with the state of California government agency to, rank plants together and to assign these degrees of conservation concern. Part of what goes into our ranking, there's a lot that can go into it, but three of the key factors are really rarity, trends, and threats. So rarity being the total number of populations, their extent, how large they are, and then trends being are the populations declining or increasing, and how much and how fast, and then threats and the severity and immediacy of threats. And I'm not going to go into each of these details, but I just wanted to share a snapshot of all the key points that go into assessing rarity. We use a multitude of resources. These are just some of the resources we use. Peer-reviewed literature, gray literature, reports. Here we have a bunch of older publications that are still really invaluable. Flora of North America, the older Jepson floras. These include a lot of plants that were previously recognized and might have been treated as synonyms and then go back to being treated again. And so they're still valuable. We also heavily utilize a lot of expertise. So this is Dave Keel here. He's a Asteraceae expert and a Cirsium expert, a thistle expert. So here he is holding a Cirsium flower. And instead of having the old map-ins that happened in the past, it's been transferred to status review groups. And this really was initiated in the early 2000s. The 7 general broad ecoregions, or the Jepson bioregions, were utilized to develop different email groups throughout the state. And so here we have the review regions outlined, and reviewers such as some of you and people you may know sign up and get emails for plants that are undergoing status review in that particular region. And so the numbers, here we have like the lowest amount in Modoc Plateau, which is understandable because it's lowest population up there, and not a lot of botanists on the ground to inform. And with the highest, we have the Northwest, and a lot of this is because the Northwest up here where I'm at, there's, the Shasta Trinity National Forest alone is over 2 million acres. And there's a lot of public land, and then there's also a lot of timber harvest land, and they do a lot of review and analysis for rare plants. And I'd like to see this number grow. You all are in the Southwest region here, and so let's get this to one of the dark blue colors, if you want to sign up. And I encourage people to sign up even if they're not knowledgeable about rare plants, but if they just want to be informed and share that information. We could learn a lot just from people that you may know and so forth. The reviewers are made up of a diverse group of people. So we have a lot of state and federal representation, and then a lot of academics and consultants. And then industry a lot of this is like timber harvest, logging industry, but it could be like SoCal Edison and other industry as well. And then we just have a number where we're not where people haven't disclosed or we're not sure, and nonprofits. Here's the information on how to become a status reviewer. If you're interested, take a photo of this or a screenshot and follow that QR code. You can be informed on what's going through, getting added or removed from the inventory, and you contribute to plant science and conservation. And we also want to know what you think. So. Okay, now this is the part of my presentation. I'm going to give you a little bit of a live demo. I've talked about the rare plant inventory, but I want to show you how it works. And so here we have the home page. It's rareplants.cnps.org. And I've zoomed in my screen a bit so that you can see it. So some of the text might look wonky or something, but trust me, it looks good when you look at it on your screen. And it is for the most part mobile friendly. We do include a lot of information in some of the tables and so forth, so there could be a lot of scrolling, but we couldn't really prevent that. And so it is for the most part really mobile friendly. The searches are really mobile friendly. And so to start with, I wanted to kind of orientate you to a few things. So we have simple and advanced search up here that take you to different pages to do different types of searches. And then they're also included down here. We have these search bars that you can use, and this menu up here stays present on all pages. So it's duplicated here on the home page, but you can get back and search for plants whenever you want, no matter where you are. And then we have these two sections down here, the left one being plants that were recently added or changed or deleted from the inventory. And this is a scrollable list. It's currently goes back to 2022. And then we have plants that are currently in review. So right now we actually have all of these plants that are in review concurrently on our Rare Plant Status Review Forum, and that have gone out to different status review regions depending on where the plants occur. So the forum is closed to the public. You have to come in and sign in. And excuse me, the main reason for that is because we disclose in the status review documents, we disclose precise locations of rare plants. And some of you might be familiar with the Dudley poaching and things that are going on, and we want to make sure we're really careful with that data. And we want people to speak freely about, locations that they may know about that could be on private property or whatever else too. So it is a forum that you do have to log into and go through this sign up process. There's various links down here, so check those out. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you something really cool here. You can search for any plant common name or scientific name. So if I wanted to search for, say, a manzanita, it's going to start to bring up, manzanita is not a good thing because it's the common name isn't used for all of them. But here you see, I just typed in a few letters and it's bringing up mini flowered Phacelia and other things. And so it works either way. So if I search for Arctostaphylos, it's going to bring up everything that starts with there. So here you have all the Arctostaphylos, but you also have things that start with Arcto, such as Arctomecon. So it really is, if you're not sure what the plant is or how to spell it, you can just start typing, which I find really useful. But really quickly, I'm going to show you advanced search. I'm not really going to do any searches here, but I wanted to show you kind of, I encourage you to go check this out. I'm just going to expand everything. You can search by a lot of different criteria. The start of it is the conservation status. Here you can also search for an entire genus or entire family. So if you want to know every rare plant that's in the sunflower family, one of the cool thing about this too is that it brings up results in the right-hand column after you do it. So we instantly know that there's 307 plants in the Asteraceae that are in the inventory that are rare. And those results can be refined down as you go through advanced search. So say we wanted to know the rarest of the rare plants that are in the sunflower family, there's 162. And so forth. So you can continue to narrow it down. And we now have ways to search for IUCN criteria. There's not very many here, plants in California that are IUCN ranked, but we do include that. You can also find out if they've been conservation seed banked. So CNPS is part of a coalition of the California Plant Rescue, and we make conservation seed collections. And these go into various institutions. Our collections primarily go to CalBG, California Botanic Garden. But so you can search to see if they've been banked if you're doing that kind of work. We can see what are endemic to California. So now if we click this, we see that, wow, there's a lot of them are endemic to California. A lot of the 1B sunflower plants are only occurring in California, which is really neat. And then you can search by county. You can do a full search by quads. So I can click on different quads and search. These are 7.5-minute quads. You can do a 9-quad search, which is more of a professional use case. And I won't go into that in the details, but you can search by habitat, microhabitat, duration, whether it's an annual perennial. So say I want only annual asteraceous plants. So I want to know what are blooming in September. So now we have 19. Just for fun, I'm going to see if any show up for LA County. So I'm going to go back up here to the county. And there's one. Okay, so we narrowed it down. I'm just doing this on the fly here, folks, because it's kind of fun. So here we have a plant in the sunflower family that's rare and endangered, that is in LA County, that's endemic to California. I didn't choose any quads to narrow it down further. And it has a blooming, or it's reported to bloom in September, and it's an annual. So now we can see what this single plant is. And maybe you know it, maybe you can find it. Of course, it's a tar plant. It's Centromatia pungens, subspecies laevis. And so here's a little bit of the detail page. I'll show you more about this later, but that's running through a search. I wanted to get back a little bit. I'm going to show just a simple search. So I just clicked up here, and I'm going to do LA County just to show you the search results a little bit. Once you can learn about some of the number of rare plants that you have. And so I haven't selected any rarity, so it's just bringing up everything in the inventory that's rare that occurs in LA County that we know of that occurs there. So here you have this list display. And again, my screen is really zoomed in, so normally it would show everything kind of on one. So you have this column of photos here, and you can turn these fields off, or you can turn fields on. So if you just click this, if you just want to make a list and print it out, you can click off the photo. Say we're not interested in when it was added to the inventory, we can just take that off. Say we don't need the federal or state status. I'm just going to kind of narrow it down a little bit, or the global or state ranks, just to kind of show you what you can do. You can print this out and it fits to one page. You can export this to CSV or an Excel file, and it will be all of our data. So I'm just going to click that really quick and see if I can bring that up to show you while that downloads. So we don't hold anything back. This is a fully public available free resource. And here you go. I mean, this is everything we track and obtain in the inventory that's at the touch of your fingers. So you get the full list of all LA County plants that are rare that you can then do, whatever you need to do with, and just print your list or modify or whatever you want. A couple other things I wanted to show you. If you wanted to make your list, say you're not very familiar with Latin names, and you want to do common names, you can drag these fields over and just move them around to organize your list. So now we have common name. I can organize it alphabetically by common name just by clicking. If you want a more traditional list, you could start with family, then go family, scientific name, common name. So I'm going to sort by family, or I'll sort first by scientific name, and then by family, and now it'll be in that order, as you can see here. So it is pretty cool. And I'm happy to share after my presentation to share more if you guys are interested to learn more about that. But I must proceed with my presentation. So now I'm going to go over some of the causes of rarity. Again, this is something I always get asked, so I've been doing a lot more of this kind of in my presentations to share. There's two major causes of rarity, if you think about it. There's anthropogenic rarity and there's natural rarity. So what do we mean by anthropogenic? Anthropogenic meaning human-induced causes or impacts. So here's some examples. These are kind of the most common threats to California rare plants. There's a lot more, and there's a lot of nuances to these as well. But some of the big ones are development in agriculture, logging, invasive species, and so forth. And especially as of recent, we're seeing a lot of significant changes due to improper burning regimes as a threat. And some rare plants are thriving and doing well because of the higher intensity of fires, maybe, or just the being burned for the first time. But some of these fires we're seeing now are higher intensity because of climate change and drought, and because of many years of fire suppression and not active fire management. So this is some plants are doing okay and rebounding well, but other plants such as stone crops and the sedum, the genus sedum, don't do well with fire. They're not adapted to fire. And some of these high severity fires have actually reached into areas that weren't previously able to really burn because of lower intensity fires that now are, and that are just, having wipe out these plants that don't have that fire adaptation. So one example of an anthropogenically rare plant that I'm actually familiar with personally is this California sea blight. This plant was once known to be more widespread in San Francisco Bay Area, but it's now really fragmented, and it's been reintroduced in a few spots where it's doing okay. But if you look at its distribution, it's highly fragmented, and it's also has this disjunct occurrence in Morro Bay area in San Luis Obispo County. And it's thought that it probably was actually more of a continuum south to Morro Bay along the coast before development. There's also some evidence that adobe brick remains indicate that it might have once been along the Petaluma River in Sonoma County. So that is indicative that it was even more widespread than we currently thought. So that's pretty cool. But the uncool part is that it's now declined because of development. So this one's anthropogenically rare. On to natural rarity. California has such a high number of rare plants because of both these anthropogenic and natural rarity. Natural rarity is typically indicative of being ecologically diverse or having specialties. So a lot of the naturally rare plants in California have edaphic endemism, meaning that they're only known to occur or grow with a certain soil type, having certain chemicals in the soil that they've evolved with to grow. And some plants have mutualistic pollinators and dispersers. So, the yucca plant and the yucca moth. I can't think of any rare plants off the top of my head. A lot of it is not studied enough, but an example can be the yucca plant and the yucca moth, how they both rely on each other. And there's symbiotic fungal associations as well. This is particularly noted in hemiparasitic plants that grow, they have a host to they partially photosynthesize, but they also utilize a host for nutrients. And so they rely on those hosts. And if those hosts are also limited, then they're rare. Okay, so an example of intrinsic rarity, an intrinsically rare plant is the limestone daisy. This one, as its common name indicates, it only occurs on limestone. And it's a high elevation Death Valley National Park plant with a really limited distribution. So as far as we know, it's always been rare, at least in our time frame. So what does it mean to be rare? Essentially, using the word rare is a statement about the geographic distribution and population sizes of a particular species. And this is best described in 3 different biological possibilities. So there's 3 different possibilities. We have a graph which shows a distribution on the y-axis being narrow down here as it goes down and wide as it goes up. And we have abundance on the x-axis, low over here and high over here. So in generally speaking, broad terms, everything here in navy blue could be considered rare based on its distribution being narrower and its abundance being low. And some of these are out here on the extremities. I'm going to describe those a little bit. So the first type of pattern to describe is being broadly distributed, but never abundant where found. So these would be up here in this A category. And a good example of this is the scalp moonwort. These are mostly rare ferns that are in the Ophioglossiaceae family. So this one is 2B, as I mentioned before, is a category of plants that are rare in California, but common outside of the state. And so this one, as you can see, this distribution map was just screenshot from the inventory, you can see how it has this broad distribution throughout the state, throughout much of the Sierra Nevada, all the way up into the Klamath Ranges, up where I'm at. And yet, where it occurs, it's very limited in numbers. We have maybe a few individuals at times. Sometimes there's just one individual seen. Yet it has this pretty broad Pacific Northwest distribution. So we consider this rare in California, but common elsewhere. Another category is the narrowly distributed and abundant where found. So these are plants that come out here on the graph. And a good example of this one is one that we recently ranked from the San Jacinto Mountains. This Kekiela is endemic to the San Jacinto Mountains, and it is locally abundant there. So there's hundreds and hundreds of plants there, but they're all confined to this one small range. So that one's considered rare. And then the last category is the rarest of the rare. So these are narrowly distributed, not abundant where found in this C category. These are often the most imperiled. So an example of this one is Catalina Island mountain mahogany. I had the fortunate ability to go and see this plant almost just a month ago from today. I went out to Catalina Island and got to finally see this really rare plant. It is only known from Catalina Island from 6 genetically pure individuals. It's one of the rarest trees, in California and the world. So there you have the 3 different categories or patterns of rarity, possibilities rather, and then everything outside of here is generally considered common. And I could put some outliers in here because this isn't always the case. It's not so cut and dry. There are some plants that are having, they might be abundant right now, but they're in steep declines. They have severe threats, and we might consider those and include them in the inventory as well, especially in our watch list category. And then, of course, an example of a common plant is the common monkey flower, which has nearly 5,000 records in California, according to CalFlora. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but just to give you an example, there are a lot of ways to define rarity. And one source is Rabinowitz in 1981 published a scientific literature on the 7 forms of rarity. And this takes it a next step further, including habitat specificity and whether it occurs in a single habitat type or various and so forth. And while also looking at the abundance and scarcity in the geographic ranges. So now I'm on to the last portion of my presentation tonight, just to go over California's diversity and number of rare plants and that significance and how the rare plant inventory applies in the conservation context. So here we have the United States and a rarity weighted richness index that was published by NatureServe in 2000. I believe this also includes animals, but you can see that California just has these red rings are the highest weighted richness index of rarity. So you can see that we have a high amount of those rings throughout the state. And then here's a graph of all of the mainland states in California and their rough estimates of number of taxa, of plant taxa. When I say taxa, I mean plants that are varieties and or subspecies. So it includes all plants, even at the lower levels. And you can see here that California far surpasses every other state in the nation for having the total native plants. 35% of our flora is also endemic, meaning that these plants only occur in the state and nowhere else in the world. And that's what is part of the reason what makes us one of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots. And then here you see, kind of leaning towards the middle, is just the California rare plants alone that surpass the majority of states that have just their native plant number. So we have more rare plants in California than most states have just native plants, which is pretty amazing. And over 1/3 of those native plants in the state are considered rare, threatened, or endangered. So 35, 36% now of California's native taxa are considered rare, threatened, or endangered, or in that watch list category. And kind of this is where the legislation kicks in. So there's, of the native flora in California, only 289 of the plants are state and or federally listed under the Endangered Species Acts. So of these 2,466, only 289 are state or federally endangered or threatened, to have that nexus of the Endangered Species Act. And so that leaves 2,177 plants that are not state or federally listed under the Endangered Species Acts. And bear with me here as I go through some more numbers. I think it's important to emphasize. So there are these higher ranks in the inventory of 1 and 2 categories that meet the qualifications of the California Environmental Quality Act, which is the strongest legislation for plant conservation in California. And the definitions of these 1A and 2A, 1B, 2B categories is that they meet CEQA 15.380. They must be considered an environmental review and be disclosed for impacts. And then, so that's about 1,500 plants. And then there's this other nearly 700 plants that are not state or federally listed, but that are in these 3 or 4 categories that may meet CEQA qualifications. So what we're looking at here is that there's these 2,177 plants that may otherwise demonstrably not be receiving protections in California if it wasn't for the work that Ledyard Stebbins helped lead 50 years ago to get this inventory to where it is today. 88% of California's rare plants are protected through the rare plant ranks in that they don't have that other nexus of being listed in the Endangered Species Acts. Now, I will say there are other protections for like BLM sensitive and forest sensitive and so forth, but I'm not going into that right now. And then also just looking at the entire native flora, so 33% of the state's flora may otherwise not receive protections if it wasn't for the rare plant inventory. And giving you an idea of what this looks like. So here is what rare plant conservation can look like today with the CNPS inventory and the number of plants that are ranked and considered rare, threatened, or endangered. These are all the points of their occurrences. And here's what it could look like without the CNPS Rare Plant Inventory. So here's all the point of occurrences for just the 289 plants that are state and or federally listed. So you can see that CNPS is doing a whole lot to be on top of this conservation for plants in California. And with that, I wanted to throw out the slide of the supporting people that supported the 9th edition that I shared with you today. The biggest contributor is really the Forest Service, California Plant Rescue, the state of California, and Center for Plant Conservation. And then thank you to my colleagues, the CNPS chapters, my wife and kids who have helped me with seed collections and other rare plant conservation work, and the developers of the rare plant inventory here, and then a couple of my colleagues, Julie and Keith, and the late Dean Taylor, who was a mentor and a staunch rare plant botanist in California. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. I didn't get any questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask now, does anybody want to unmute themselves? Laurel, did you raise your hand? Or I saw Diana. Oops.
Oh, I was clapping.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, I did have there's a couple of messages in the chat. Let me look. Oh, they're thanking. So I think you kind of answered my question. It doesn't, it isn't as important for a plant to be federally or state listed. Is
It
then
is
why
really
would it?
important.
Okay.
It is important for like state and federal listing comes as like the highest kind of conservation you can get for plants because it has that added protections under the Endangered Species Acts. But the point I was trying to make is that um, there's not enough plants that are ranked state or federally that meet the criteria. So I should actually bring that slide back in my presentation. One of the things that the inventory helps do is identify plants that ought to be state or federally listed because they meet that criteria, but it's also to prevent plants from becoming state or federally listed by bringing that attention and survey and survey work and protection for them. So
Why is it so difficult? Then it seems like it's pulling teeth
it,
to try to get a state or federal listing for a plant. I'm not I'm not sure about animals. I know sometimes it's difficult with animals too, but um,
yeah, it's
it's
often it comes to funding and it can become a political process. So that's one of the great benefits of CNPS doing this work is we're a nonprofit. So we really focus on the science and we don't have like the political ties or the monies that can influence the process. Um, so, you know, state funding goes to places maybe that we as voters don't want it to go to in some areas where, you know, I'd rather support more funding for the state to have more capacity to do state listings in-house and so forth. And the federal process is really held up through often just politics and not having the resources. So
Edith,
sometimes it does take litigation to get to there.
I have a question from Edith Reed. Edith?
Yes, I've increasingly over the last few years, I've become concerned about the collection of voucher specimens. I understand why, but I'm wondering if we could lean more toward very thorough documentation, photography, even microphotography in the case of small plant parts. But I heard recently of somebody saying that, you know, they could collect up to 20% of the population as voucher specimens. And I'm just concerned, especially for rare plants, whether that's potentially contributing to some of the issues we're having with rare plants.
Eve, I'm so glad you brought this up. It's a really important topic. So it actually, I want to emphasize the importance of collecting. I don't know who has a permit to collect 20% of the population, but for rare plants, we have the 1 in 20 rule, which is often what permittees allow. Is so if there would be 20 plants, you're allowed to collect one, and those variables change based on the ecology of the plant. So if you're collecting perennial plants, like say you're collecting a ceanothus, a buckbrush, or a tree, you don't have to kill the plant outright. You can take a branch, a cutting, you know, that often like can happen anyway, where people, you know, run into a branch or a kid's pulling branches off of shrubs and so forth. So, but with small annuals, yes, you do, you know, collect the whole individual. But you know, I'm not aware of any over collecting other than illegally for like poaching at this time. There was, I think it was Beecher Crampton, way back in the turn of the century that was over collecting vernal pool species. And like in single vernal pools, there's potential like local extirpations from collecting like 30 samples of the same individual when they maybe only needed one or two or a few. But I will say that it is essential for rare plant conservation and for science and to get plants described. The vast majority of plants that are described new to science, which is still happening all the time in California, there's been roughly a dozen per year for the last several years that are described in California. And the majority of those plants are described from herbaria research and being able to actually really closely examine those plants. And with the advancement of technology, academics are also able to start, and researchers are also able to start extracting DNA from voucher specimens. And the more recent the specimen, the better. And so it's this adage that I'll say that Dean Taylor shared is you can't extract DNA from a photo. And there are some plants where photography and that kind of documentation is very beneficial. I shared with you the common monkey flower. A lot of the monkey flowers are diagnostic through their nectaries, and so they can lose the coloration and the spotting when they're flat pressed. They often shrivel up and you can't even see the flower very well. So in some cases, especially for monkey flowers, it's really good to have photo documentation. But there is the saying that without a voucher, it's just a rumor. And so some of these rare plants, we have this increase of records being collected on a naturalist and through CalFlora, which is great. But we still run into times where we're not sure, we can't validate because there is no voucher and the photo isn't good enough at times. So we rank a lot of rare varieties and subspecies where the differences are very minute and you need to dissect them, look at them on our hand lens. And a lot of that can't always be captured by a photograph unless you have really good, flash and everything else. So I'd say there is a way to do it ethically and correctly, and leaving as little harm as possible. And a few years ago, I worked on developing a policy for CNPS, or rather their guidelines for the best practices and ethics for voucher collecting. And I'll throw these into the chat because I would love for you to share this with the person that has permission to collect 20% of the population and say they ought to be utilizing these, because it's not only for rare plants, it's really for just ethical collecting all around.
Any other questions? Well, then I'm selfishly going to ask one of my questions. What do you think about the horticultural propagation of rare plants? I mean, is that beneficial if there's just a few of a certain plant, and if we all planted that plant in our gardens, is that something, then there isn't a few of them anymore, and maybe it adds to the biodiversity, or is that something that is frowned upon?
It's such a good question, Snowdy, and that's another one I get a lot. It really depends. I think that for the most part, like well-meaning people that want to do this, it might not contribute to that species as a whole. So a lot of rare plants are, have specific requirements and, these unique adaptations. And so growing them at your house is more like for that kind of cool factor of having something that's unique and sharing that knowledge of what the plant is. But there's also, so there is the potential of cross-pollination contamination with genes, and that's the biggest concern with planting natives. The real concern there is if you're in a rural interface and you're in an area where that plant, could grow, you could potentially be introducing populations that could be cross-pollinated. And often in a horticultural setting, these plants are growing with all different other kind of similar plants, and they hybridize and they become something else. So our goal is to protect those original genes, those original unique species, and not to, be protecting something that it's come into a difference. And so the best way, the best practices for that, I feel, are really in like a greenhouse controlled setting where people are propagating rare plants for the use of restoration to outplant them. Because if people are doing that at home, without knowing the source, and it's just a lot of carefulness that needs to be going around that kind of situation. But I do encourage, having rare plants, and they're pretty cool to collect as long as it's done legally and ethically. I hope that helps answer your question. One last thing, since oak acorns can't be stored. They're working on doing in vitro tissue storage and being able to replicate them, but the acorns can't be stored in long-term storage. So there are these kind of farms that are being developed for oak trees to be able to gather acorns for restoration, including rare oaks. So that's pretty cool.
Diana has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, for your great talk. I I work for a landscape architecture firm, and there's a lot of discussion, of course, about these lists that are showing up about like trees that are considered like climate ready for the future of California. And then I know there's a lot of discussion about if or should we be assisting kind of migration of plants in climate change. And I'm kind of wondering about your thoughts on that, especially in regards to rare plants and conserving them.
Man, I'm getting all the tough questions. Yeah. It can be, it's kind of where I sit on it. So I think that it's going to have to be utilized, where it can be. There's to some extent, we're going to have to do what we can to keep some of these species alive. But I guess I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I'm just thinking of the multitude of rare plants that occur in California. They're often have a habitat specificity there. They require a certain ecosystem. They have uh, congeners, these pollinators and so forth. And so a lot of the plants that we're seeing that are going through local extinctions or extirpations is because of their habitat loss. And so in a lot of cases, it's not like there's that habitat available anywhere else to put them. So it can be, that kind of a difficult situation to try to establish rare plants in new places. There's also a lot more that needs to be done with soil microbes and studies in mycology and their associations with mycorrhizae. So I will say that it can be successful and it has been, but the sad case is that often, like the extirpations we're seeing in the declines, it's because that habitat's lost and there's not any habitat really where we can find to put them.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Snowden, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. My mouth was moving, right? There's a couple of questions in the chat. So you don't think that cultivation at home is a good way to do ex situ conservation or intra situ?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I could be persuaded I think there could be more research into it. I think as it is now, there could just be too much contamination with the genes for that. And so often, for ex situ conservation, it's really best to have it in a controlled environment. And that could exist at people's home as long as, that's done properly. So there is a potential there.
And another question came up, are there any efforts to get the rare plants not protected on the California or Federal Endangered Species Act to protect them and their habitat?
Yeah, so there are, through the Rare Plant Inventory, that's one of the best tools that we have to protect rare plants that aren't state or federally listed under the Endangered Species Acts. As I was briefly mentioning too, is that it can help identify plants that need to be listed. And so CNPS is actively, will review petitions and try to encourage. The Rare Plant Program Committee of CNPS continues to work on looking at prioritization of what plants are the most needed and dire needs for state or federally listed. And then we actively work with volunteers to try to get petitions going and written so that we can petition plants for listing. So that's one thing we're doing. But besides the multitude of plants that aren't listed, utilizing the legislation that we have, the California Environmental Quality Act and the California Rare Plant Ranks, and using that nexus to put it on for getting plants protected at the local level.
Okay. It seems like it's a very slow process, but
It's yeah, so listing is really, so the state listing can be it's at least a year, if not two, for state listing process once it gets submitted, and then federal can last for years.
okay.
And that's after you submit a petition.
Okay.
And then you actively have to, testify and work towards that. Whereas for the inventory, from the time the status review goes out to closing, if all goes to plan and there's not disagreement, then it's 5 weeks.
So the status review people, that's that closed group that people can participate. They meet and make a decision, and then
Yeah, so unlike meeting
ranking
through we meet on the forum in that way, and people can comment on there and go back and forth. And if there's disagreement, we send it out for a couple more weeks and we'll reconvene.
okay.
And we do have in-person meetings when so some of the plants that we downrank can be contentious and we get more information than we had before. And we will still hold in-person meetings if it becomes necessary to really, have all stakeholders present.
Okay.
That reminds me, I forgot when I was giving my tour of the inventory, I ran out of time anyway, but I was going to show you some of the recent additions to the inventory that are pertinent to LA County.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank everybody for attending, and I know we had some competition this evening.
I know, I'm sorry.
Matthew, do you have a question before we finish? Matthew has his hand up. Matthew? Oh, well, okay,
You're
guys.
muted, Matthew, if you're...
Yeah, you're muted, Matthew. You may have pushed the wrong button.
Yeah, you can always email me too.
I think he wrote a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, that's the yeah, Matthew asked that question.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you very much, Aaron, for taking the time, and it was very fascinating. I learned so much this evening about the process. And this will be recorded, and we'll try to get it up on our webpage sometime real soon too. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.